Hey everybody, this is Daniel Worthy, and I'm going to be going through a quick presentation on how to write better JavaScript and jQuery. This is a high-level guide that can be used by either front-end or back-end developers. Real simple JavaScript and jQuery functionality that will improve your code quality, and the maintainability of your code. So, just to tell a little bit about myself, my name is Daniel Worthy. I'm currently a technology architect at Rockfish Interactive. I've been there for about 6 years now. In my role, I'm frequently pulled in to look at both front-end and back-end code, but I'm real passionate about JavaScript, whether it's patterns or performance. As an architect, I'm used for code reviews and setting code standards for our JavaScript and front-end standards. You can find me on Twitter at WorthyD, and you also have my LinkedIn, and I have a tech blog, worthyd.com/techblog. So anyway, the first item on our list is to always use the latest version of jQuery and use a CDN version of jQuery when possible. Reasons why we want to use the latest version are new features and performance. Performance is a very important feature that's included with the newer versions. Upgrading jQuery is typically painless. When 1.9, I believe, came out, they started deprecating and actually removing functionality, which they released jQuery Migrate, which will help find your code that had issues with removed functionality. So, for instance, if you're using Live or the jQuery.browser functionality, it would throw out in your console, say, hey, this feature's deprecated. The production version of jQuery Migrate would still make the code work without writing out to your console, so you wouldn't have that performance hit. Typically, upgrading any issues I've encountered has been with third-party plugins, whether it be just out of date code that hadn't been upgraded in several jQuery versions. If you want to see a performance test between the selectors between 1.4, 1.6, 1.10, I have a link here to a JS perf test. There are drastic increases between each version of jQuery with the selector engine, Sizzle. So where can you find a CDN version of jQuery? The Google APIs have a version of jQuery, typically the latest version. Code.jQuery.com has one, but they have started pointing you to the Google APIs. Then the ASP.NET CDN also has a version of it. Now, if you use one of these, typically it's a good idea to include a JavaScript fallback, and I've included a snippet here on how to do that. And what you would essentially do is check for window.jQuery, and if it's not present, do a document.write, and write out your local version of the CDN of your jQuery file. Now, this most likely isn't the greatest way to write out that. With JavaScript, you may want to create your script tag, set your source attribute, and write it out that way. This is essentially the one-liner to do that. Now, the benefits of using the CDN version of jQuery is that it's free. It's going to reduce the bandwidth to your servers. Typically, your web pages can only download so many assets from one domain at a time, and so offloading it to a third party is going to increase the front-end rendering speed of your website. And it's also going to provide better caching. So let's say, for instance, you have two sites referencing the Google CDN of jQuery. When a visitor visits one site and then goes to the other, they most likely will already have a cached version of that jQuery file on their machine, so they won't have to download it again. Now, another important question to ask yourself, this is going to be on a project-by-project basis, is when not to use the CDN version of jQuery. And that's going to be when, if you have an internal app, say for a client that restricts the various URLs for projects, that Google isn't allowed. So you'd want to reference a local version of it then. An offline application, something like a mobile web application that relies on offline features. And then if you want to use a custom jQuery build, jQuery 2.0 has a new feature where you can customize your jQuery build. Say you don't want to use the animate functionality, or you don't want to use specific pieces of traversing or event binding. You can build a custom version of jQuery without those, which would provide you a smaller build of jQuery. And then also, if you have trust issues, if you just don't feel like you can rely on a third-party source to host your jQuery file, your jQuery source. Typically, Google is going to be up all the time, and if Google's CDN is down, there's a lot of other sites that are going to be having issues. So, in general, I would typically recommend using the CDN version unless you fall under one of these criterias. So our tip number 2 is to use raw JavaScript when you can. jQuery is built with JavaScript, and your raw version is always going to work better than anything that's built with it. So this is another JavaScript performance test that using JSPerf. I thought I had a link to it, but I guess I don't. Where we use our jQuery method of getting an attribute, and then we use the raw JavaScript version of attribute. I performed this test on in Google Chrome, and so we had 45,000 operations per second using the jQuery method, but we had over 800,000 operations per second by doing the raw JavaScript. So the reason behind this is because when we're calling this, it's passed into the jQuery constructor. So it's constructing a jQuery object with it, and then it's going to try and find the attribute ID. Whereas with this this method, we're using the native this and just immediately accessing the ID value. And so another instance where this can really benefit is performing loops. Using jQuery each is extremely popular. It allows for a lot of flexible commands, but if you're using just a basic loop, it's best to use just a standard for loop. One thing I had noticed with this for loop that performs the fastest of all the different loops that were included in this perf test was that they actually cache the length of your array. Typically what I would see right here is len.length or a.length right there to get the length, but I guess behind the scenes it calculates that. So caching it this way actually allows for better performance. And then there's another JSPerf test to compare the different methods. Some of these tests take a little bit of time to execute, so I'm just including the links there. And there are going to be occasions where $.each is viable. If you're only looping through, say, 10 elements in an array, .each will be fine. It's definitely a lot less code than writing out your loop, so it's a situational based feature. Alright, now the number one thing, the easiest thing you can do is cache your selectors. So right here is a snippet of code that you would typically see inside your application. And this is really common. It's real easy to just copy and paste your code. So for instance right here we're going to be submitting a form, and so here we go and get our text box for name, check to see if the value is empty. If it's empty, we're going to add a class of invalid and return false, and if it's successful, we're going to get the data and then post it to our URL and perform later logic. And so if you notice right here, we're calling this we're selecting the element 3 times. So to cache your selector, what you would do is plug it into a variable, and so we'll select it once, put it into a variable, and then here we'll do txt.val, txt.add class, and then another val right here. The reason that this performs drastically better is each time you call this selector, it's going to crawl the DOM to find the elements matching the selector. Now for a backend developer, that's like performing the same database call 3 times and just pitching your results for every single if statement or function. Over time, or say inside a loop doing this, it could really kill your performance if you're looping through enough elements. And depending on the number of layers of JavaScript you have in your application, this could really not caching your selectors could really affect the performance of your application. So just to reiterate why it's important to cache your selector is the DOM is searched each time you use your selector. You want to use real simple, straightforward selectors. Select by class, ID, or tag name. If you start using attribute selectors, they're a little bit slower because there's not an easy native match for it. It's the quickest and easiest thing you can do to speed up your code. You plug it into a variable and refer to your variable later. And like I had said earlier, performing in a loop is probably the number one killer that would affect your app's performance. Alright, now event handlers. Now there are several different ways of binding events to elements. So right now there's bind, there's delegate, there was live, on, and click or double click or all the specific events attached to that. Now behind the scenes, what do each one of those do? Well, bind actually does on now. Delegate is the equivalent of on, but they've flip-flopped the element and the event name. And then click actually performs on click. They introduced on, I believe, in 1.8, jQuery 1.8, and it's to add a more consistent event additions. Not a lot of people would use delegate properly, or know when to use delegate. And so this adds a lot more consistent event binding. Now the last one that it's been removed, but it's called live. And so what live did was, let's say you had a dynamic piece of content. Say you're adding a bunch of list items to an unordered list. You would have your selector, and then you'd bind your event and your function call. Anytime an additional list item was added, you would, on click of that, it would still execute. Behind the scenes, what this was doing was adding a event listener to your body tag, and when that click event would happen on any element inside of your body, it would check to see if it matched the selector, and then would execute that function on if the selector matched. So let's imagine on this page right now, if I bound an event to, let's say, the deprecated tag, I could click down here on my navigation arrows, and it would still fire an event to check to see if it matched the selector. Now, in a very basic application, that's not a big deal, but if you have several hundreds of HTML elements on your page, that DOM is getting crawled drastically anytime you execute that event. And so if you wire up 3 or 4 of those, that's 3 or 4 events that are getting triggered on click. So that's one reason why it was removed. It was first introduced in 1.3. They officially deprecated in 1.7 and removed it in 1.9. And so here are the list items of essentially what it did behind the scenes. Now, for a little bit more visual of how to use on to get the same effect. So with our JavaScript, when we click our input bot, our add button, we're going to add an li to our unordered list. When you click the list item, we're going to trigger an alert Then we're going to have, this is our old click method. This is how we would typically do it in the past. And then this would be one for dynamic. So with our HTML and then our basic CSS, our result, give it a second to load. This is the fiddle snippet, so it's loading from an external site. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to that site to save some time. So if you look down here, this is our list 1. So this is the one that doesn't have dynamic elements or dynamic event binding attached to it. And so when we click our new items, we don't get a JavaScript alert box. But if we click on our initial one, we do get it. With this one, our initial one clicks, we continue to add items, and we get that alert box also. One of the ways how we would used to obtain the same effect would be to either use the live or use the lesser known delegate method, or actually writing out the on-click event to our li. And so an additional, we would add a line here that would say on-click equals this, which is a little less desired. It's not as maintainable. We're having to hunt and peck around to find that code. Let's see. Alright, and so one reason to use on over click, because most of our instances you're typically gonna be binding click events. It's not that often where you're gonna be doing double click or any other event like that. So let's say, for instance, you have a navigation with a sub-navigation, and on your desktop browser you want to trigger the show of the sub-navigation when the user mouses over it or hovers over it, and you want that to gracefully fall back for a tablet. Since tablet doesn't have a hover event, we need to account for that. And so one great use of the on event is detect. In our example, we're going to detect to see if the user can touch. If the user can touch, they're using a tablet or a touch friendly device, and we're going to use touch start as our event. And if they can't touch, we're going to use hover as kind of our default. So here it wires up the touch start versus hover based on where they are. And so we have one line of code to handle the two devices, whereas in the past we may have done an if statement utilizing modernizer, where it says if they can touch, execute this line. If not, do this line. It's really great to use touch start because it gives the user a very crisp experience, because you may not know that the click event on a tablet doesn't actually execute until the user removes their finger from, or removes their finger from the screen, or like mouse up. So providing a touch start and say a menu gives them that immediate feedback makes a very clean and crisp user experience. Alright, so this section is where there's going to be a lot of potentially what am I trying to say? Take this stuff with a grain of salt. These are methodologies. These are by no means absolute 100% proven stuff to run with. So how to write more maintainable code. There is on Stack Overflow, there's a big long list of funny developer sayings or developer advice, and one of those things that really stuck out to me is code as if the person who's maintaining your code knows where you live and they are a psychotic murderer. And so I always try to write my code so that the person who's coming in behind me doesn't have to dig through a bunch of documentation to figure out what's going on. I try to properly name functions and variables and add comments when necessary. So one thing that I personally have found that drives me bonkers is a JavaScript file that at the very bottom of it has the document.ready function at the bottom of it. So simply including the file executes JavaScript. And so eventually what happens is you have one JavaScript file that's controlling the entire website, wiring up all the events inside one document.ready. The reasons that this can really be difficult to work with is if you have compression and minification on your website, your production side, and your staging side. It may be difficult to find where exactly what files is executing code and wiring up click events or any other events. It's typically, from a maintainability standpoint, it's better to have code on the page at the foot of your wire up events at the bottom of your page instead of an external file. Keeping the self-executing out of your out of the external files actually allows somebody to easily find it. And additionally, so let's say you have a tab navigation or a tabbed feature on a page, and you decide to dump that into your self-executing file. That's going to execute on every single page. Therefore, your main page that it's actually on is going to execute that JavaScript, but any other subsequent page, it's going to try to execute that jQuery selector, find that element, and then if it's not coded well, may actually try to execute code on top of it, which will bog down your pages. And so the recommendation for this is to create an adapted JavaScript pattern. It creates more reusable code. It's more scalable. Not having a pattern can be expensive can cost you a lot in the long run. And up front, it may look a little expensive, but in the long run, will help out with your applications. Adi Osmani, has a really great article on JavaScript design patterns. I've read through this article several times, and I've remolded how I do JavaScript from an application level several times based on it. It's a really great article and worth a couple reads. What I've been doing, the pattern I've been using lately, I typically work in ASP.NET MVC web applications, and so I will typically name my JavaScript file based off of my controller and my view name. So this is a part of the home controller, and it's the index page. So I'll do a var home index, and then I'll create my function with my pass-in parameters. I'll pass in jQuery and document. Now I rename those as they come into the file to $sign and D. The reason for this is that some frameworks or CMSs such as Kentico, Electron, WordPress, Drupal may use jQuery no conflict, which prevents you from, or it's designed to help utilize other libraries in your code. I typically don't use MooTools or any of the other JavaScript frameworks that utilize $sign, and so in my code, I like being able to use the $sign. It's a lot shorter than having to type out jQuery. So what I do is I just pass in the $sign. That way my code is safe regardless of what applications it's being plugged into. I also pass in document and shortcut it to D. That way I can do d.getElement by ID instead of document.getElement by ID all over the place. This pattern we return our public events. So we have our initialize, and then which refers to a private function. We also have private variables and private functions here. Slight security feature to prevent people messing around in the console to call like rebinding events or other various security related items. I don't know. And so on my page, on my actual page, you'll see this script block where on document.ready, or sometimes you'll want to execute it before document.ready, we just do home index in it. So what it does is when I'm looking at my HTML file, I actually see, okay, we're calling home index initialize. I'll go hunt down this file and I'll be able to find this function instead of digging through an arbitrary file to find self-executing JavaScript. Alright, some of the easiest ways how to improve your JavaScript. There are several really good one-shot sites out there. These JavaScript best practices part 1 and part 2 were recently published with some really good quick and easy practices that to help out with your JavaScript. Browser Diet is a great website that focuses on some of the YSlow practices. If you're not familiar with YSlow, it is a Firebug extension designed to assist with speeding up the front end performance of your website, such as putting script at the bottom, style sheets in your header. Browser Diet dives a little bit deeper and helps you find all the easy ways how to slim up your website. There's another site, How to Keep Up to Date on Front End Technologies. This site is a good one-stop place. They have all the Twitter followers that you need to follow, all the tech blogs to follow, newsletters. It's a large compilation of the best resources. They do include CSS and HTML5 in it, but they also have a really good number of JavaScript gurus or experts. And then the Mozilla Developer Network has some really good documentation on some core JavaScript functionality. And kind of as a last resort, I would say W3 Schools. W3 Schools is a little misleading because their name kind of hints that they're a part of the W3C, which sets standards for web-related technologies. I don't use them for jQuery reference. I use them typically for extreme raw JavaScript stuff, such as date functions and very primitive related stuff like that, string replacement and other items like that. They're usually not my go-to place for jQuery or other frameworks. Then another great resources to keep up with JavaScript is read some keep up with the right blogs. Adi Osmani, he's a developer programs engineer at Google. He has some really good jQuery performance presentations and slides that for me personally totally changed how I wrote jQuery. Elijah Manner's another good one. He was a .NET developer gone jQuery developer, and he's real big into Backbone.js now. He has several great video presentations on fixing common jQuery bugs and C# habits that are bad for JavaScript, and several other videos on Channel 9 that are simple enough that are real simple to understand. NetTuts on the Tuts Plus network is really good for they have a real large library of jQuery and JavaScript articles that really help, especially on the basic low learning levels. Echo.js is kind of an aggregator. I included it on my RSS feed for a while, but it bloated it quite a bit. A lot of good resources, but it's almost too much to be able to absorb. So if you're big into checking your RSS feed every 10 minutes, it's a great resource. Several other good resources are newsletters. I subscribe to JavaScript Weekly and HTML5 Weekly, and they give you high level some of the great stuff that's come out in the last week, in a real friendly format that's easy to keep up with. It's not overwhelming you. They link you to the articles, and it's good just to archive it and use it for future reference. So to to test out your JavaScript and play around, use some what I would consider JS playgrounds. JSPerf is a JavaScript performance website where you can take two snippets and execute those snippets to see which ones perform the best, a lot of people use it to compare versions of jQuery or similar functions that do the same thing to see which one works the best. JS Fiddle is a great edit snippet tool where I showed an example earlier where they give you 4 panes of your CSS, your HTML, and your JavaScript, and they can reference the different JavaScript frameworks that you use. I typically use it to write out code snippets for coworkers. I can share that code snippet to them, and they can see, hey, here's how I execute this type of code real fast with the given context. CodePen's is similar to JS Fiddle, but it's more of a show-off playground of look at this cool HTML5 feature that I built. But at the core, it's very similar to JS Fiddle. Another great resource at improving your JavaScript is to look at source code. jQuery is a great example. It's hosted on GitHub. The source is on GitHub, so you can clone it to your local machine and dig through it. Underscore and Backbone are also on GitHub. They're great resources to dig through. Underscores is kind of an accessory. I would consider it an accessory library. They do a lot of array manipulation and stuff like that isn't present in all browsers, and so they write fallbacks for, i.e., if it doesn't support, say, array splitting or sorting and all that stuff. It's very well documented, and some real good examples in there. Backbone is written by the same person who does Underscore, and so obviously the code for that's great too. AngularJS is another one of those JavaScript MV star frameworks. It's also on GitHub, I believe. Another good framework to look at the source code and see some good examples on how to write your JavaScript differently and get a different perspective on how to write it. So that's pretty much it for me. Here's a list of some of the sources I used. A lot of the stuff I used for this came from various other presentations. By no means it's 100% my research and resources. I've tried to compile some of the best stuff you can do to improve your JavaScript. I'm definitely by no means a true expert at this. I'm just very passionate about learning how to code better JavaScript and teaching other people how to code better JavaScript. So I'll be having these slides up on my website shortly after publishing this video. Really appreciate any feedback. I'm very new at doing presentations, and so any feedback, whether it's positive or negative, hit me up. I want to provide better training resources, so please provide your feedback, and I will do my best to start providing better and more frequent content. I really appreciate the view, and we will see you guys on the next one.